The palace had survived interviews, accusations, fractured loyalties, and years of public silence. But according to the account now emerging from behind royal walls, the most consequential moment between Catherine and Meghan did not happen before cameras. It unfolded during one last private encounter, when the two women entered a room without advisors, confronted the damage between them, and walked away knowing their relationship could never be repaired. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. The closed door changed everything. Catherine arrived carrying years of restraint, while Meghan entered believing there might still be room to negotiate what had been broken. Their meeting followed a discreet visit, tied to a wider family matter, when communication between the Sussexes and the working royals had become guarded and controlled. The working royals are family members who carry out official duties for the monarch, and that distinction had turned every private exchange into something larger than emotion. Catherine and Meghan had not spoken meaningfully in private for a long time, making the decision to remove aides deeply personal and dangerously exposed. Catherine did not come seeking revenge. She came to end uncertainty. Meghan, however, believed the encounter might reopen a door closing for years. Then the princess spoke with a calmness that made the message harder to escape. Trust, she said, had been damaged beyond repair. From that moment forward, contact between them would be formal, limited, and tied only to unavoidable family matters. Meghan did not answer immediately. Her expression tightened as she realized this was not a negotiation, a test, or an invitation to begin again. Catherine had come to close the relationship with dignity before another private wound became a public weapon. Outside, a palace staff member waited in silence. The aide later described the moment in a documented internal account, explaining that the conversation stopped, followed by the scrape of a chair. Then came a pause, more severe than shouting. When the door opened, Catherine stepped out first. She looked pale, but remained controlled. Meghan stayed behind, motionless, staring at a small handwritten note resting between two untouched cups. She could have taken it. She did not. That refusal carried its own message, because the note contained more than a boundary. It contained the truth neither woman had been willing to say aloud, and its meaning would expose what each believed she had lost. To understand why a few quiet sentences carried the force of a royal rupture, the story must move beyond the closed door and into the private wounds both women brought into that room. By the time Catherine and Meghan sat opposite one another, neither woman was simply confronting a sister-in-law. Each was facing a living symbol of everything she believed had gone wrong. Catherine saw duty turned into accusation. Meghan saw vulnerability answered with distance. Between them stood two husbands, two families, and two completely different understandings of what loyalty inside the monarchy was supposed to mean. Catherine had spent years learning that private pain could not be allowed to disturb public duty. The monarchy, the system in which the sovereign and senior family members represent the crown, depended on control, even when that control demanded silence. She had considered reaching out more than once, especially when the distance between the two households became impossible to ignore. Yet every time she imagined an honest conversation, another fear stopped her. What if her words were repeated? What if a private moment was reshaped into another public accusation? The princess did not fear disagreement. She feared exposure. Patience had protected her position, but it had also trapped her inside a silence that Meghan interpreted as judgment. Meghan carried a different wound into the room. She had entered royal life expecting family warmth behind the formal smiles, but palace restraint slowly began to feel like emotional abandonment. To her, silence was not protection. It was control. She believed she had been judged before anyone had truly tried to understand her, and she was convinced the woman sitting opposite her had never fully acknowledged how isolated she had become. Harry knew a private conversation was planned, but she had not told him its full purpose. The Duke, Harry's royal rank as the son of the monarch, might have tried to prepare her, challenge the conditions, or bring old anger into the room before a single word was spoken. She wanted one final chance without either brother shaping the outcome. William saw the strain before the meeting began. He watched his wife straighten a folded sheet of paper on the table, then smooth it again, although it was already perfectly aligned. "Are you certain?" he asked. Her hand trembled for only a second. "It has to come from me," she replied. The prince understood that she was not walking into an argument. She was walking toward an ending, and he could do nothing except let her face it. When Meghan entered and saw no secretary, lawyer, or communications advisor, hope briefly softened her expression. Catherine noticed it, and sadness replaced the anger she had expected to feel. A documented account later provided by the palace staff member outside the room revealed that both women had prepared statements. Neither followed them. The first personal question destroyed every rehearsed sentence, and the conversation moved toward the older moment that had poisoned everything between them. Long before Catherine delivered her final verdict, one overlooked exchange had already convinced both women that the other could no longer be trusted. The collapse did not begin with a television interview or a public accusation. The decisive trigger came during a tightly controlled family ceremony. When a private request was rejected, a whispered exchange was misunderstood, and a room full of relatives pretended not to notice. To outsiders, the event passed without incident. Inside the family, it became the moment Catherine and Meghan stopped seeing each other as misunderstood women and began seeing each other as threats. Windsor had been chosen because its walls could make the family appear united. After months of controversy, the relatives gathered for a fictional private ceremony, planned to calm speculation. Yet every movement had been negotiated. Seating, entrance times, private access, and family photographs carried meaning because each detail signaled who stood inside the royal circle and who remained at its edge. The ceremony followed household protocol, the internal rules controlling rank, access, and public representation, but those rules offered no protection from resentment. Minutes before the proceedings, Meghan approached the princess with a request she believed was simple. She wanted one unscheduled photograph with Harry and their children beside the family. Catherine refused. The arrangement had not been approved, and changing it could reopen the argument over royal status that the gathering had been designed to contain. Meghan heard exclusion disguised as procedure. She pressed again, certain that the future queen could end the humiliation. Catherine felt the trap closing. She believed the Duchess had selected the most vulnerable moment, knowing refusal would look cold, while agreement could ignite another palace crisis. Meghan followed her into a narrow corridor and lowered her voice. "You could change this with one word." Catherine stopped, tightened her grip on the program, and answered, "That word would not belong only to me." Neither woman raised her voice, yet the exchange cut deeper than an argument. The Duchess saw confirmation that the princess had chosen the institution over compassion. Catherine saw proof that Meghan would turn private pressure into moral accusation. A nearby courtier witnessed the encounter and later described it in a documented household account, noting that both women returned deeply altered. Meghan became unusually still. Catherine avoided her gaze. Afterward, the rejected photograph reached Harry in a harsher retelling, suggesting deliberate humiliation, while William heard that his wife had been cornered during a family occasion. He saw an attack. Harry saw betrayal. By nightfall, one corridor exchange had split into two rival truths, and Meghan resolved that the next meeting would not end in silence. When the two women finally met again, the rejected photograph was no longer a minor disagreement. It had become evidence in a private trial neither was willing to lose. There were no shouting aides, no palace lawyers, and no husbands positioned between them. Only Catherine, Meghan, two untouched cups of tea, and years of resentment compressed into a single room. The confrontation began with controlled politeness, but that restraint did not last. When Meghan challenged Catherine to explain why she had been kept at a distance, the future queen stopped speaking in the language of protocol and answered personally. Catherine began with careful pleasantries, but neither woman believed this was a reconciliation. They had come to establish the final terms of a relationship already damaged by suspicion, public exposure, and the fear that every private word might someday return in a harsher form. She placed the handwritten note between them and left it unexplained. The note, A personal message written without palace staff or official wording, carried no formal power. Yet its presence made the silence heavier, because Meghan knew it contained something the princess had been unwilling to say aloud. Meghan looked at the paper, then at Catherine. She asked why private disagreements had repeatedly been treated like security risks, as though her presence alone threatened the family. The Duchess believed palace caution had become a judgment against her character, and she refused to let that accusation remain hidden behind procedure. Catherine answered that confidence had disappeared when intimate disputes became public narratives. She could no longer separate a family conversation from the possibility of future exposure, and that uncertainty had changed everything. Meghan leaned forward. "Then say what you believe I did." Catherine met her gaze and did not look away. She said trust had been broken every time private pain was turned into public leverage. Every time personal suffering became part of a wider argument against the institution. The words landed hard. Meghan replied that silence had protected the monarchy while leaving her undefended, and for the first time, the future queen hesitated. She understood that restraint intended to prevent scandal could also deepen genuine harm, especially when one woman was expected to absorb every accusation without answering. Catherine finally admitted that she had once wanted the two families to remain close. She had imagined their children growing together, and believed distance could be repaired. But after the Windsor ceremony, she stopped believing closeness was safe. Meghan pushed her chair back, then froze before standing. The teaspoon beside her untouched cup struck the saucer, shattering the controlled stillness with one sharp sound. Neither woman spoke for several seconds. Catherine's verdict sounded deeply personal, but an insider later explained in a documented household account that senior figures had already shaped the rules governing any future contact with Harry and Meghan. The room held two women confronting each other, yet unseen decisions had entered before either of them arrived. The confrontation belonged to Catherine and Meghan, yet the boundaries surrounding them had been shaped by decisions made far beyond that room. Royal families rarely admit when an emotional fracture becomes a matter of governance. They change schedules, restrict access, narrow communication, and allow procedure to deliver the message no one wishes to announce. Behind Catherine's final words stood a palace system already preparing for permanent distance, and at the center of that machinery were William and Charles, two men confronting the same family crisis from very different positions. William had reviewed the confidential briefing before his wife entered that room. He read one paragraph twice, closed the file, and stared through the window without speaking. The briefing, a private document used to prepare senior royals for sensitive decisions, confirmed that contact with Harry and Meghan had gradually been moved away from casual family exchanges and into structured channels. Calls were arranged, messages were recorded, meetings were given narrow purposes. Officials believed this would prevent misunderstanding and reduce the risk that private words might later surface without context. But every new safeguard also made reconciliation feel less possible. William understood why the restrictions existed, yet he hated what they revealed. He wanted to protect Catherine from another encounter that might leave her exposed. But the prince also remembered when speaking to his brother required no briefing and no witness. Harry had once been the person standing beside him against the pressures of royal life. Now, every conversation carried suspicion. Every silence carried accusation. The future king was not simply enforcing distance, he was grieving the relationship that had made such boundaries unnecessary. Charles felt the same fracture from another position. The king feared permanent estrangement, but he also believed another uncontrolled dispute could deepen public damage to the monarchy. During a private conversation, he placed his pen on the desk and told William that family affection could not operate without limits when every encounter carried constitutional consequences. Constitutional consequences meant risks affecting the crown's public authority, official duties, and political neutrality, not merely private embarrassment. The monarch still loved his son, yet he could no longer pretend that affection erased institutional danger. The household reached a severe agreement. Catherine's meeting would not reopen arguments about status, privileges, invitations, or public roles. It would communicate one boundary: future contact must be formal, documented, and tied to a specific purpose. The princess held emotional influence, but she did not possess the authority to create that policy alone. Senior household figures, including William and Charles, had already accepted the framework surrounding her. Catherine's handwritten note carried the personal wording of that decision. She had deliberately separated it from official palace language, so Meghan could not dismiss the message as the work of advisors. The words belonged to the princess, but the boundary behind them belonged to the institution. Once the Duchess understood that, the confrontation changed. She was no longer arguing only with one woman. She was facing a palace already behaving as though the rupture might never heal. What had begun as a painful conversation between two women was about to become a new reality for everyone connected to them. The meeting did not end with a dramatic declaration. It ended with silence. Catherine stood, Meghan remained seated, and neither woman reached for the untouched note between them. Outside, a member of staff lowered her eyes as the door opened. Within minutes, two separate accounts of the encounter began moving through the family, and the differences between those accounts revealed just how completely trust had collapsed. Catherine left first because another obligation waited, but no one nearby mistook the speed of her departure for indifference. Staff understood that she was trying to preserve control before emotion broke through. The princess moved into the corridor, saw William, and stopped. He studied her face once, then dismissed the waiting aide without explanation. She placed both hands against the back of a chair to steady herself and said, "It is finished." The future king heard relief in those words, but he also heard grief. She had drawn the boundary she believed necessary, yet in doing so, she had extinguished the last private hope that the relationship might still be repaired. Meghan remained alone for several minutes. The silence felt less like privacy and more like judgment. A household official eventually escorted her through a discreet route, meaning a private exit used to prevent unwanted encounters with other family members or waiting staff. She understood why the arrangement existed, but its careful control deepened the humiliation. What had once been called family contact had now been reduced to managed access, written terms, and supervised movement. The Duchess had entered expecting confrontation. She left feeling that the conclusion had been decided before she arrived. Meghan called Harry from the back seat of the waiting car. She began with confidence, describing Catherine as cold and unwilling to reconsider, but her voice stopped when he asked one question: had she listened? For several seconds, the Duchess said nothing. Then she answered that the princess had arrived with a conclusion rather than an open mind. Harry heard rejection. He also heard the strain beneath his wife's certainty, and that hesitation troubled him more than the accusation itself. Catherine's account moved differently. A documented palace record stated that Meghan had repeatedly returned responsibility to institutional mistreatment, while the Duchess insisted that the family refused to acknowledge the damage caused by silence. Both versions contained pain. Neither version allowed much room for the other woman's fear. An aide later collected the handwritten note after Meghan left it behind. Catherine ordered that it be sealed rather than destroyed. The sealed record, a preserved document kept unchanged for future reference, became proof that she had tried to speak personally, even while delivering an institutional boundary. Yet preserving it also suggested that the princess expected the encounter might one day be disputed. The fracture seemed complete. Then William and Harry agreed to speak without advisors, and the certainty surrounding both accounts began to weaken. Just when the fracture appeared absolute, William and Harry faced one another without advisors, and the truth became harder for either man to simplify. For years, every exchange between William and Harry had carried the presence of advisors, statements, interviews, and inherited resentment. This time, there was no institutional buffer. In a brief private conversation following the encounter, the brothers spoke not as opposing royal camps, but as sons, husbands, and men who had watched the women they loved become symbols in a conflict neither family could fully control. Harry requested the meeting because one question would not leave him alone. Had Catherine spoken only from personal hurt, or had she delivered a formal decision already approved by the palace? The distinction mattered because private rejection could still contain emotion, while institutional rejection meant the doors had been closed by an entire system. William agreed to meet because he refused to let another encounter be reshaped by advisors, whispered accounts, or competing interpretations before his brother understood what had actually been intended. Harry entered without greeting and remained standing. Was she speaking for herself? William closed the door, faced him, and answered, "She was speaking for what she can survive." The words changed the room. The Duke heard an accusation hidden inside them, as though Meghan had become something dangerous. He challenged his brother immediately, saying that self-protection could not excuse emotional abandonment. The prince did not raise his voice. He admitted that Catherine had lived with private fear since family conversations began resurfacing in public, leaving her unable to trust that pain shared in confidence would remain private. William also admitted something harder. Meghan may have felt abandoned long before she spoke publicly. The future king knew palace silence could look like caution from inside the institution, while feeling like betrayal to the person left exposed. Harry's anger did not disappear, but it shifted. He revealed that his wife had not entered the encounter seeking status, privileges, or public concessions. According to what she told him in a recorded private conversation afterward, she had hoped Catherine might validate one part of her experience and admit that the isolation had been real. William listened, then disclosed what the handwritten note contained. One sentence carried no accusation and no condition. Catherine had written that she was sorry the family had reached a point where kindness itself felt unsafe. The note was not a settlement document, meaning an official agreement defining rights or future roles. It was a personal attempt to say that trust had collapsed so completely that even compassion now felt dangerous. Neither brother apologized fully. Too much history stood between them, and neither man was ready to surrender his version of the past. Yet Harry finally understood that the meeting had not been designed to humiliate Meghan. Catherine had been trying to end the cycle without creating another public battle, even if the method caused fresh pain. That fragile recognition remained private. Beyond the palace walls, however, fragments of the encounter were already moving toward the press, stripped of hesitation, grief, and context. Inside the family, the meeting had become a tragedy of broken trust. Outside the palace, it was about to become a global spectacle. The leak transformed a subdued private ending into an international drama before either household could control the story. Within hours, commentators were choosing sides, old grievances were being replayed, and a conversation built around sorrow was recast as a victory for one woman and a defeat for the other. The palace feared another media war. The public saw something even larger: the final collapse of a relationship once expected to modernize the monarchy. A palace-connected source described Catherine's final boundary, Meghan's reaction, and the handwritten note left behind. That account spread quickly because it offered what the public had been waiting for: a clear ending to years of uncertainty. Palace communications staff refused to discuss the private family conversation, meaning an exchange not intended for official release or public record. Sussex representatives challenged claims that the Duchess had sought titles, privileges, or royal concessions, insisting through a written response to journalists that she had entered the meeting seeking acknowledgement rather than advantage. But restraint could not compete with spectacle. A London newspaper placed separate photographs of Catherine and Meghan beneath the headline, "The Final Conversation," dividing their faces with a torn line. Charles saw the front page at breakfast, folded it inward without finishing the article, and asked why private grief always became public entertainment. The king had spent years watching family pain turn into headlines, yet this coverage felt especially cruel because neither woman had left the room claiming victory. Both had carried loss away with them. Catherine felt the pressure close in again. She had tried to end speculation, but the meeting created even greater scrutiny, especially around the personal note she had never intended anyone else to read. The princess feared one sentence would be stripped of meaning and used as proof of weakness, guilt, or rejection. Meghan felt something equally painful. She believed the coverage had transformed her hurt into evidence against her, and every headline seemed to suggest that emotional defeat proved personal wrongdoing. Harry urged his wife not to answer publicly. He knew one statement could restart the confrontation, pull William back into defense, and force Catherine to respond through the palace. The Duke understood that silence might look like surrender, but speaking could destroy the fragile understanding formed between the brothers. Meghan resisted, then stopped. For once, she allowed the accusation to remain unanswered. A broadcaster framed the encounter as the moment the monarchy formally separated its future from the Sussexes' independent public life. Outside Kensington Palace, a small crowd gathered near the gates. One woman left 2 white flowers tied together. Another visitor quietly separated them and placed one on either side of the entrance. The gesture captured what the coverage could not. Connection had not vanished, but it could no longer remain whole. The public chose heroes and villains. Catherine and Meghan chose something harder. Neither issued another attack, and that silence carried the final meaning. When the noise finally receded, the real verdict was delivered not through another statement, but through the silence both women chose to keep. In the end, there was no reconciliation, no triumphant apology, and no dramatic return to the relationship the public once imagined. Catherine and Meghan left their final encounter with different memories, different wounds, and the same irreversible understanding. Closeness without trust had become impossible. Yet the meeting was not meaningless. By speaking directly at last, they ended the cycle of false hope that had kept both women emotionally tied to an unrepairable bond. Catherine accepted the boundary without celebration. She and Meghan would remain connected through family history, shared memories, and the lives of those around them, but direct contact would become rare, formal, and limited to unavoidable moments. The monarchy also drew a firmer line between private kinship and public royal responsibility, meaning family emotion would no longer be allowed to decide official access, duties, or status. That separation brought control, but it also confirmed how much intimacy had already been lost. Catherine understood that protecting her family might be described as coldness. The princess no longer believed she had to surrender emotional safety simply to prove she possessed compassion. Meghan reached a different but equally painful conclusion. The Duchess accepted that the recognition she wanted would never arrive in the form she had imagined, and she chose not to issue a public rebuttal to the leaked account. Catherine later opened the sealed copy of her handwritten note while alone. She read the final sentence once, placed the paper inside a drawer, and turned the key without tears or hesitation. The message contained no threat, accusation, or royal command. A royal command would have been a formal instruction carrying institutional authority, but these words held only regret. 2 women who had once hoped to become family had reached a point where distance was the only kindness they could still offer each other. Meghan faced her own final choice in California. She opened a drafted statement on her phone, read the defense she had prepared, and deleted it. Then she placed the device face down and told Harry that answering would only return them to the same room emotionally. He understood. Their silence did not erase the hurt, but it prevented the encounter from becoming another direct public attack between the brothers. William and Harry remained divided, yet their private exchange stopped the crisis from deepening. The institution emerged more controlled, but undeniably diminished. It had preserved stability at the cost of another intimate family relationship. Catherine did not defeat Meghan, and Meghan did not expose Catherine. Their last encounter ended a bond that could not survive distrust. It was painful, final, and necessary. A private goodbye disguised as a boundary. Leaving both women free to stop waiting for a reconciliation neither could safely give. The palace door closed on their relationship, not with hatred, but with the solemn acceptance that sometimes the only way to end a royal war is for both sides to finally stop fighting. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.